Welcome to Easton's Community Forum. I'm Priscilla Almquist Olson, and today is August 13th, 2020. And today we have the privilege and honor of having Jared Rose, who is our Senate candidate, state Senate candidate, and part of his jurisdiction is in Easton. We're also welcoming Dr. Kyla Bennett, who is a environmental law lawyer as well as a biologist, and she's going to join in, has some questions for you, Jared, as well as me. Let's start off with your background, education, family, where you come from, and so forth.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for having me, first of all. A little bit about me, my background. I grew up here in Mass, in a small town called Acushnet, which you might be familiar with. I went to all public schools, went to UMass Amherst for my degree. Then, after college, I went to go work in the legislature as a state Senate aide for a number of years for a very progressive state senator named Pat Jalen. And there, we really worked on a ton of different policy, particularly around environmental energy, how to prevent pollutants from getting in, housing policy, transportation policy, our school systems, and a lot more. I left there and went into real estate, helping my family's business. And we went from a 3-person company to a 26-person company in the last couple of years. And I live in Stoughton now with my wife and my 1-week-old son. So if you hear some noises going on, there's just a lot of crying and stress going on in my house right now. And I'm running because I really feel that there's like a real potential for real opportunity in this district that we're not really seeing right now. And, I was really involved in my community, have been for a long time. I'm on the Cultural Council and the Historical Commission and a whole bunch of other things here in Stoughton. And I thought that was enough for me. But a couple of really interesting things happened to me, which kind of got me into this race. The first one being that I simply couldn't find out how my state senator was voting on question 3 last time on 2018. Multiple calls, multiple denials, and that, you might remember, was the transgender quote-unquote bathroom bill. And I had worked on trying to pass that original piece of legislation that the ballot was seeking to overturn. So I was really interested in, how my local folks were talking, what they were supporting. And I simply couldn't get an answer. And then, in March of 2019, our state senator was the only Democrat who voted with the Trump administration to keep cuts to Title X in place. And you might be familiar, Title X is sexual health services, family planning, cancer screenings, a whole wide range of things. And it really affects upwards of 70,000 women all over the state. And those kind of values are not acceptable to me. So I decided we were going to go into this race and really try to bring a fresh voice and a new progressive vision into this district.
Okay, my turn. So that was a pivotal point in your decision to run for state senate. And but I know there must be other influences in your life that have impacted who you are today. And maybe you could share some of that with our listening and viewing audience.
Yeah, one of them that really kind of affected me was I went to UMass Amherst, like I said, and I was an intern for Congressman John Oliver, who represented Western Mass. And working with his office, we were able to work with him and Rep. McGovern and a few other folks. And I held a rally in 2012 against the Obama administration's plan at the time that they were going to raise student loan interest rates. And I helped put together this rally with both the congressmen, our local state senator, who was Stan Rosenberg at the time, our local state rep, and a whole bunch of other people. And we got news attention and so on. And ultimately, not obviously just through this single rally, but the Obama administration did back down because there were things throughout the country like this. And I kind of realized the value of local activism and the pressure that elected officials can bring. And then I saw that also, continue throughout my time in the legislature, and then and really, saw it firsthand there as well.
Okay, so you have done behind the scenes all the grunt work, shall we say, that supports all of these progressive ideas and legislation. And so you're intimately familiar with what it takes to do the job, because you've been doing the job for at least the past 8 years. And I'm sure also that you have values that brought you to that job, maybe from your family, your growing up. Could you talk a little bit about those values?
Yeah, I grew up very middle class family, right? And I went to, I grew up in the town of Acushnet, which has a K through 8 school system and doesn't have a high school. So then I left high school, I went to New Bedford High. And New Bedford High is an extremely diverse high school with lots of really great programs and lots of really hard challenges going on at the same time. So I was really able to see firsthand, both through my own background of kind of growing up in a more suburban community, and then being really exposed firsthand in high school to some of the direct challenges that the government is really involved in, be it dealing with our environment. So like my high school, for example, was built on a landfill. And while I was there, and I know Kyla will really appreciate this story. While I was there, they found a whole bunch of chemicals all over the place, and the EPA came in, and their answer to it was to shut down a number of single classrooms, and the next classroom over you were fine to be in, apparently. And mind you, this was the Bush administration. So I really got to see from a direct level of how you can use government to be a positive force in society, or vice versa. And that's one of the reasons that I'm running and got involved into this sphere of work where that's one of my primary goals.
Okay, very good. Kyla, Dr. Bennett, would you like to jump in now with some questions?
Sure. Jared, congratulations on the birth of your baby. And Priscilla, thank you for having me. Jared, one of the issues that's really facing the people of Easton in your district right now is COVID-19 and the schools being opened. Can you tell us a little bit about, well, first I'd like to hear how you think Governor Baker has handled the COVID-19 crisis in Massachusetts, but also what your feeling is about the reopening, not only of the public schools K through 12, but also schools like your alma mater, like UMass Amherst, and what they should be doing.
Yeah, well, UMass just released a really interesting program where they said that they weren't going to allow students to come back in for in-person classes unless absolutely necessary. And I think that wasn't just that. I think that was for the system and not just UMass Amherst. But I'm a really science-driven person. I like to look at the data and try to figure out how best to use that for our services, right? And looking at the data, I just quite frankly don't see a way that you can safely bring back students in a real capacity, right? And what the Baker administration has really allowed to happen in this field is they've kind of turned a lot of the decision making over to the superintendents and the school districts, which normally I'm in favor of, right, of local control. But when you're dealing with a virus, this virus isn't respecting international boundaries. It's certainly not going to respect the boundaries of certain towns. And so if you have one superintendent who makes a big mistake and all the surrounding communities don't, all those surrounding communities are still going to be dramatically affected. So I really think we need a statewide approach to a lot of these issues. And we need to really seriously invest and look into how to have effective remote learning. That is not a thing that I went into this campaign like expecting to talk about, or that brings me a lot of joy to say by any means. But I looked at a lot of the data, and it simply does not seem remotely possible to not have massive outbreaks that kill a lot of people without doing something like this.
Garrett, I think also to underscore your point, which is very valid, is the fact that there are currently over 2,000 children and staff, teachers who are quarantined in America.
Exactly.
And obviously, this number is going to multiply.
And, you know, a lot of folks say, well, the children have a very low death rate of this disease, which good, right? Obviously, that's a good thing. But for every person who dies of this, there's 10 to 19 people who have serious lifelong organ damage. And so they're not just like waking up and leaving the hospital and everything's hunky-dory, right? You have serious lifelong damages that are happening to folks. And so, and if that happens in childhood, obviously you have a whole lifetime of that damage, right? So we need to figure out as a society and as a legislature how best to kind of deal with that issue. And, you know, the federal government under the Trump administration is certainly not doing that. So it's really on the states and the legislators and the governor to really kind of make that decision, unfortunately.
Oh, go ahead, Priscilla.
No, I was going to say, Kyle, I'm sure you have some other questions, so continue.
Can we talk about climate change for a minute? We're sitting here, I'm sitting outside. We've been in a heat wave for a while now. We've got a drought going on. Easton was the recipient of an MVP grant, the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness, where we tried to figure out how the town can best prepare for climate change. Can you talk a little bit about what your goals would be if you did get into the state Senate as far as climate change, addressing climate change goes, and how municipalities in your district, how you would help us prepare for what's to come?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you look at this district on a map, right, it has multiple big things going through it. And especially it has multiple highway systems going through it, and commuter rails, red line, so on. And so if you go to my website, you'll see that we actually released a Green New Deal for Massachusetts plan that kind of goes into detail about a lot of the different programs that we need. And to kind of go over them briefly, one of the big things that I'm really pushing for is to transition to 100% renewable energy really as soon as possible, right? And I want to put like as soon as possible into the legislation, and not like some folks have put like 2050, 2060, so on. That is quite frankly too late, right? I will be 60 years old by 2050. And you have 30 more years of damage, and it just doesn't seem, based on the science, that we will be able to turn anything back at that point. So focusing on that, where we get our energy from, is kind of the beginning in many cases. Then also kind of stopping a lot of the expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure, our gas pipelines, and trying to reuse them in some ways, where there is some really interesting technology right now where folks can can theoretically use those gas pipelines that already exist for renewable geothermal energy. So you don't have to build anything new. The wells are already dug. You can, in theory, use it as a renewable energy source, and the infrastructure is already there. And then obviously building out a adaptation plan for this district and for, quite frankly, the whole state. And, you know, as an example of this, last summer, my wife and I were driving home on 93 South in the HOV lane, right? And you might imagine it's a single lane with concrete barriers on both sides. And all of a sudden we got hit by, you know, one of the sudden storms that we've been having lately. And like 2 feet of water come just rushing at my car. It looked like we suddenly went into the ocean. And our highways just simply aren't built to kind of handle that level of disruption. And, you know, Easton has a lot of farms in it, for example. Sharon has a lot of farms in it as well. And we've seen the price that a lot of these communities are facing with our droughts and then sudden massive storms, right? So not only are you weakening our crops and our animals and so on, but then you're hitting them with high level waters that can extremely damage them, right? Now, some folks have told me, Jared, even if we do all these things, we can't stop climate change with just Massachusetts. That's true, right? Just like statistically in math. But we can make it the best we possibly can be and have a great environment for Massachusetts and be an example to the nation and the rest of the world for how to copy it and how to best do it. And we have the leadership and the infrastructure here now to do exactly that.
You talked about alternative energies, and I'm a big solar proponent. I live in a solar house. But lately, you know, there is a carbon footprint associated with solar panels. There's downsides to wind power, for example, impacts to endangered birds and whales and things like that. What are your feelings about the new generation for nuclear power, which some people think is needed as a bridge to stop with the fossil fuels? I mean, the generation for those small nuclear power plants are supposed to be safer. They can use existing fuel waste as their own fuel. What are your thoughts on that? Is that a big no for you or something you'd consider?
No, it's certainly not a big no for me. And it's definitely something I would consider. I am not a huge expert in the new versions of nukes, of nuclear energy rather. But from what I've been told by folks like you and some other experts in the field, that it has a lot of really huge potential. And that a lot of the downsides of nuclear energy that we've seen have been like the 1970s infrastructure, like Fukushima, for example. But going forward, it might actually be absolutely necessary. And just because of the amount of energy that you need, right? Like we produce about 100 megawatts of, 100 gigawatts rather, of energy through renewable sources right now in Massachusetts. We use upwards of 55 terawatts of energy right now a year in Massachusetts. So you need to increase that by exponential ways. And some of that's going to be solar, and some of that's going to be wind, and some of that's going to be geothermal, but it might very well need to be nuclear just so that it goes on. I'm not an expert in that, and I need to do more research, but I'm definitely open to it potentially.
What about net metering? There's been a lot of fighting about net metering. I personally love it. I haven't paid an electric bill since I put my solar panels in, and I actually have a huge credit with the electric company because they have to buy back my extra energy. And there's always the fear that that's going to disappear. That, and also the federal solar tax credit, which is going from 26% this year to 22% next year. And then in 2020, after 2021, it's going to go away. So there'll be zero unless we have a different administration that re-ups it.
Right.
What do you think about the tax credits in Massachusetts and net metering, things like that?
So this was actually one of my primary things that I worked on in the legislature. I cannot tell you how much time and energy and meetings and briefings I spent on net metering and dealing with all the specifics. So I'm a big supporter of net metering, right? It makes the most sense in terms of how to deal with energy generation. And for those unfamiliar watching at home, net metering basically means that your house is if it's a power generator and you have solar panels, you have wind, what have you, and you develop more power than you use, you sell that energy back to the grid and you get credits for your electric bill. So oftentimes you're making more in the summer than you'd use, and you can use those credits in the winter. Now, of course, the utility companies hate this, right? And fight it tooth and nail every time. And the legislature has had a small growth exponential on net metering so that it doesn't grow too quickly. And part of the fight has been on whether or not to eliminate that growth, whether or not to eliminate that cap rather. I think we're at the point where the cap just needs to be done away with. And allow the growth to happen. And the state then needs a plan for what the steps are that needs to be taken with utilities on the back end to kind of support that growth. Especially once things like storage, electricity storage, batteries for homes and stuff become much more common in going forward.
Since the pandemic, a lot of people have been working from home, and a lot of companies have realized that it's a doable thing. In fact, they sometimes can get more work out of their employees because they don't spend, like my husband worked in Cambridge. He's been working from home since March. He used to spend 3 hours a day commuting. Can you talk a little bit about public transportation? Because Easton, as you know, has no bus, no train, although we have train stations all around us.
Yes.
Easton has been traditionally opposed to the South Coast Rail because of the at-grade crossings in town, the danger, and also would bisect the Hockomock Swamp, which is one of our potential drinking water sources, and it is a drinking water source for a lot of other communities. So can you talk about what your vision would be for as we come out of this pandemic, whether you think we should be increasing public transportation or trying to get more people working from home or having some kind of hybrid? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's kind of a yes and, right? Because almost regardless of how many people we have work from home, there will still be a lot of people just by necessity that have to work in person, right? And especially if you look at the major industries in Greater Boston, you have universities, hospitals, laboratories, that type of thing. It tend to be huge and huge draws. So those folks have to commute one way or another. So we do definitely want to expand and grow our public sector transportation. And that really looks like really trying to get a handle on our commuter rail system and quite frankly, kind of take it away from some of the abuses that Keolis has done over the last couple of years. And, you know, this is a little side note, but in Canton last year, there was a fire that they made everyone get off the train for, and then they put everyone back on the train before the fire was out. And it's just kind of a perfect encapsulation of all of the problems, right? And then, one of the other interesting things too to think about is that as people work from home, if this is a more permanent lifestyle, what happens to all the office space, right? You have entire skyscrapers in Boston and all of the surrounding communities that have huge office complexes that are just offices. So the interesting thing is that maybe all of those things could become condos or living spaces. And now all of a sudden you have huge relief on your housing sector by introducing all of these units all at once. So I think it's more of a yes and trying to figure out what the next phase looks like, how we incentivize that growth or not, for both sides. And I also want to make sure, quite frankly, that companies aren't abusing their employees with work from home policies either, right? Work from home can be very expensive. You need to buy your own laptop, your own computer system, your own desk, your own printer, so on. So how is that process being handled by companies? Are they pushing all of those costs that they would usually take onto their employees, or are they paying it themselves? That type of thing.
The pandemic has also caused, as you know, a lot of financial distress for all municipalities, and we're all crunched. A lot of this is affecting our schools, but also other things as well. And because of that, I've heard a lot of people grumble about the Community Preservation Act. Here in Easton, we put 3% of our taxes towards the Community Preservation Act, which buys conservation land, helps with affordable housing, and also historical properties. So some people want to, I haven't heard town officials say this, but I hear residents saying we should get rid of that 3% as tax relief for the residents. I'm concerned about it because we use that money for things like affordable housing, conservation of land, and historic properties. But I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the CPA and using that as a method of, is that going to disappear? Or is that something you think should disappear in the future in Massachusetts?
No, I don't think that it's something that should disappear. And I definitely support CPA funding. I think, one of my frustrations with the underlying problem of what has happened to the schools and towns' budgets with COVID is that something of this nature was pretty predictable for the last 20 years, right? Maybe not COVID itself, but something that massively kind of took out from our resources and understood, and we need a plan. And so for me, one of the first things that I would really like to do is really kind of look at a lot of our massive corporate giveaways and tax giveaways that we give to some of these huge corporations. As an example, the city of North Andover just gave Amazon $10 million so that they can build something there, right? You know who doesn't need $10 million? Amazon, right? They have more money than the US government at this point, probably. And so I'm not talking about small mom and pop, stores or what have you. We have some seriously massive corporations that earn huge amounts of money off of the people of Massachusetts. And they have massive tax giveaways, both from the state and the local governments. Now, we don't even necessarily need to do this permanently, although I would kind of like to do that. But even on a temporary basis, the legislature could wipe away some of these tax loopholes for 1 to 2 years and give kind of the emergency funding to the schools and the boards of selectmen and the towns and so on, so that they all don't have to cut massive services, right? And just looking at the state as an example, a huge chunk of the budget goes into mass health and healthcare services. That's also one of the first places that they're going to start cutting because of just necessity, if that has to happen. So when services in the government are cut massively, people get hurt and often die. So I would like to start there and figuring out how we can generate this money. And there's a millionaires tax that people are considering right now that the legislature's passed a couple of times and then might be on the ballot soon, which is great. That is definitely necessary. but it requires a constitutional amendment. This type of thing does not. It is just a thing that the legislature can do and do it on a temporary basis if necessary and generate that revenue that we can have.
Can you talk a little about your accessibility to people in Easton? You're challenging Senator Timilty, who I have never been able to get anybody on the phone or get him to respond other than just a generic email response. I'm wondering how you plan on being responsive to the people in your district. How accessible will you be, and how do we get in contact with you if you win?
Yes. So one of my kind of core philosophies going into this is that public officials should tell people what they believe and invite the people to tell them the same thing. And at the end of the day, you might not agree, and you might have to agree to disagree, but everybody knows where everyone stands, right? And one of my frustrations with Senator Timilty, who, by the way, I have nothing against Senator Timilty on a personal level. I think he's perfectly nice man. We're just talking about job performance here. And is that he doesn't have that approach. And as an example that just immediately happened was the police reform bill that the legislature just voted on. Now, I know Senator Timilty's record probably better than anyone not named Walter Timilty. And I could not tell you ahead of time, and neither could you, Kyla, or anyone who reached out to him, what his opinion was on this massive bill with 100+ amendments to it that really changed a huge chunk of our criminal justice system. And that's not okay, because it doesn't allow your district to talk to you and influence you, which is what is supposed to happen, and vice versa, right? And it also doesn't allow the leader, in this case the senator, to also influence back and tell people why they voted this way and like why they believe it's important. So one, I think just being open and honest in that case. Two, having, I'm trying to have once we get into office, much more like Zoom town halls. I imagine COVID's gonna happen for quite some more time. So in-person stuff is not gonna be accessible. And one additional benefit of Zoom things like this is that people can go on it for half an hour, in between dinner and putting their kids to sleep, and they don't have to get ready and like go somewhere, right? It narrows the time frame that people need to devote to anything, so they're able to do more. So we're really planning on much more like virtual interaction with folks in each of the 10 towns, and really trying to have a more physical presence on like after work hours, right? And what Senator Timilty does now is he has occasional office hours, usually around 10 to 11 a.m. in a town hall. And it's good that he's having them, don't get me wrong, that's a good thing. But very few people can afford to come to town hall at 10 or 11 a.m. And so oftentimes the folks who he talks to tend to be leaders like the, police chiefs, board of selectmen, and so on, when we also want to engage with a lot more other folks.
You may know that DJ Henry lived in Easton before he was murdered in New York. His family is still here. We have a very active BLM group here in Easton, and a group called Raising Multicultural Kids in Easton, and it's something that is of concern to a lot of us. And I'm wondering that, and also equality for everybody, women, people of color, sexual orientation. Can you tell us a little bit about what, if anything, you plan to do to make things more equal? I mean, here we are in 2020 and the ERA has never been passed. What are your thoughts on that?
So I kind of know that I'm coming into this from like a point of like, real privilege, right? Where I am a straight white male. So I know that I will never have some of like these lived experiences that a lot of my constituents have. So part of my goal is to try to be the best listener and ally that I can be in many of these contexts, right? So I think especially for racial justice, you have a couple of key issues where one is dealing with the criminal justice system. And so the police reform bill is a good start on that, but there's a lot of other things we can do, especially involving like mandatory minimums and drug sentencing and how a whole bunch of stuff works. Environmental justice is also part of racial justice because you often see the largest forms of pollutants dealt in the area, in the poorest areas, which also tend to be the largest minority populations. And housing justice, right? If Donald Trump kind of put it in black and white just today, right? Or maybe it was yesterday. With a baby, all the days are kind of blurring together. But when he said the suburban house mom's going to vote for him because he's not going to let the poor people move into the suburbs anymore, right? And it's not even a dog whistle. It's just a full-on statement of like, we don't want minority poor people to live in these districts, which is just, so wrong in so many ways. So one is obviously as a straight white male, understanding and learning all of those facts is kind of the first step. And then trying to lead or be a support person for leaders, right? Because there are times when, as an example, I was endorsed by the Bay State Stonewall Democrats. They are one of the leading LGBTQ groups in the state. And when they said, like, how would I like to get involved? They said, like, look, like, if you need me and you want me to speak and use my voice, I will be there for you 100% of the time. And if you just want me to show up and be a support person and try to amplify your voice, I will also be happy to do that. Because knowing that we each have different roles in how to accomplish a lot of these things. And so a lot of times it's about listening and learning and trying to be like the best ally you can.
Priscilla, do you have any questions?
Pardon?
I said, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I just see that your campaign manager, Trent Fortner, has joined us. Trent, would you like to make any comments?
Sorry, my camera might be a bit shaky because my microphone broke on my computer about 6 months ago. But the fact that I need it every single day as a campaign manager means I can't take it to Best Buy to have the microphone checked. So my camera work might be a bit shaky here. I just want to thank you guys for giving us the opportunity to, get some questions and talk to the district and try to get, our message out there and hopefully share Senator Timilty's record with a few more people in the district and let them know, what representation or maybe lack thereof they have in the state Senate.
Well, Trent, tell us why you believe that Jared is the best person to represent the constituents of his district in the state Senate.
Well, I've worked with Jared now for, actually, I think I just had my first anniversary with the campaign a few days ago and didn't even notice it with all the hecticness, but
there's a lot been going on.
There's a lot been going on, especially Jared. Jared's got a lot more going on than I do, but the campaign's got a lot going on too. In that time working with him, I've really been impressed with Jared of just how, I've worked in a lot of campaigns. I've known a lot of politicians who've run for governor and everything else, and a lot are about what's the message that sells? What can I bring to it? What do I say to get this person to vote for me? But as Jared gets questions, and even if it's a question that maybe has been broached before, he's not that well informed of, he really wants to understand. And we've had conversations, and Jared can admit sometimes he gets off in the weeds because he'll get into the sort of minutia of policy. But I think that kind of somebody who really wants to dig down into the issues and figure out, what can we tweak and how can we make that work? And I think that's what we have now. We don't have now for the district. We don't have somebody who uses the position as a way to learn, to grow, and to best help the people of the district. You have someone who is, unfortunately just kind of a place filler, makes his votes, does what he does. Jared wants to be the kind of person who solves problems, who gets into the details, learns, grows, and brings his best to the district. And he's been all over. I've traveled back when we used to, get to travel to places, and listening to him talk to people in the district, he wants to help them. He wants to hear them, which is people have said we've never heard. We've had people in Milton who've been represented by Senator Templety since 1999 who said, I've literally never spoken to him, and I'm the chair of the city's DTC. So that's why I think Jared's going to be the best. He's going to be open, honest, and really want to understand all of the things that go into being a state senator and creating policy.
And he also seems to be a doer. So once he understands, he's offering solutions. And I think that's what all of the voters in Massachusetts really want in their representatives.
Mm-hmm.
He also, the thing that really struck me today was when he said very plainly, I don't know, when we were talking about the nuclear. I don't know enough about that. And to hear that coming from a politician is so refreshing, because you said, I don't know, I will look into it. But that's such a better answer than trying to say something that you think I want to hear, rather than admitting that you may not know enough and you're going to look into it. I really appreciated that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Oh, this is making me feel so good about myself.
Well, if no one has any other questions, I want to congratulate Jared, not just on this, he's throwing his hat into the ring on this state Senate race, but also on the birth of your son, who
Thank
is
you.
just celebrating his 1 week anniversary.
Yes. Yes. He's a little munchkin. We love him.
Pardon?
Oh, I just said he's a little munchkin right now.
Well, that won't last for long.
Yeah.
Anyway, we appreciate Kyle Bennett, Dr. Bennett, joining us, and Trent Fortner, also campaign manager, and your kind words, and also you perceive Jared Rose for the man he is and the person he is, and we appreciate those personal comments. And so that's it for Community Forum. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. And don't forget to vote. And if Jared Rose is your candidate, be sure that you get your vote in. And the date of the election is September 1st?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
And you can vote early from the August 22nd to the 28th at your town hall. And you can also vote by mail.
Terrific. We have all bases covered.
Exactly. No excuse.
Again, thank you so much. All the best.
Thank you, Priscilla.
Especially you,
Have a great
Jared.
day.
Good luck.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.